Right, well, welcome to today's video where we're going to be diving into a crucial part of our digital lives when we're talking about FLOSS, and that is web browsers. Today we're going to be talking particularly about desktop web browsers. So what are the choices that we have? Which ones are worth our time? And do we really have any option beyond Chrome? And the good answer is yes. So as always, I'm going to cover 4 key areas in this video. I am going to give you a little bit of the history of web browsers because I think when you know where you've come from, you have an idea as to where you're going to. I'm going to provide you, as always, with tools, knowledge, website, links so that you can make your own decision. I say this in every video, but please take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's a constantly evolving landscape, and what you need will be unique for you. What I need is unique for me. So I will give you a rundown of the browsers I've personally tried and tell you what I use. But please, please, please use the information to research, to make your own decisions and choose what's right for you. Okay, so let's talk the history of browsers. So the history of web browsers, I guess in historical terms isn't very long, but there's a lot that's happened and it is extraordinarily well documented. There are hundreds of videos out there, so I won't do a deep dive today. But I will cover just some of the basics. So for those of you who weren't around or don't know, you at least have the top level. So the first web browser was called WorldWideWeb. Catchy name. It was created in 1990 by Tim Berners-Lee, otherwise known as the founder of the internet. He later renamed it Nexus to avoid confusion with the World Wide Web, but it laid the groundwork for the web as we know it and love it today. In the early 1990s, browsers like NCSA Mosaic were wild and revolutionized everything because they allowed us to put images in line with text. Imagine that, images and text on one page. Crazy. But Mosaic really was groundbreaking for its time and arguably became the ancestor for almost all modern browsers. So this was a really critical time in history. And Mark Andreessen, who was one of Mosaic's developers, left and went on to create what became Netscape Navigator. This again was the next revolution. Netscape was hugely used until Microsoft's Internet Explorer came along and ignited the browser wars. And I would say that Microsoft comprehensively won this war by bundling Internet Explorer with Windows. So for the majority of people that were getting used to PCs at the time, using Windows, this Internet Explorer browser came with it. What's the point in Netscape, right? So Internet Explorer 1 effectively killing Netscape. But one of the best things that came out of these browser wars was Netscape sort of came up from the ashes. They decided that they were going to open source a lot of what they'd created, sharing that with the world. And that's what became the Mozilla Foundation. So some of you will know Mozilla, some of you won't. But one of the biggest things that Mozilla is known for is creating and releasing Firefox. So Firefox has roots all the way back in open source, but also to really the start of when web browsing became a thing. Okay, so this brought us up to around the late 90s, and I want to actually pause the history to give you a little bit of context on some terms, because I think it helps to understand when you're using a browser, what's this actually been built on, and people use things interchangeably, so I want to simplify this for you. So you've got 3 things. You've got rendering engines and JavaScript engines. So these are the guts, the core things that help content to get displayed, web content to be displayed. And the reason that they're separate from browsers is, yes, they can be displayed in a browser, but if you open an email on your desktop or anywhere else, if you're displaying on something that's not a web browser, you are still displaying web content, just not in a browser, right? So those rendering engines and JavaScript engines are the foundational technologies that are used to display and to show everything that you see in your browsers today. They are an integral part of that browser, but they are not the browser. So these two things are different. What you also have next is browser frameworks. And these typically combine rendering engines with foundational browser tools. So great examples include Chromium and WebKit, and also things that sort of combine everything into one, like Gecko, which is under Firefox. Then web browsers. I feel like I don't need to explain what a web browser is to you if you're doing this, but this is sort of the full application that we actually interact with as users. So things like Chrome, Firefox, Brave, Safari, that's what a web browser is. But it's powered by these underlying technologies, each of which have their own story in history. So when we're talking about rendering and JavaScript engines and browser frameworks, almost every browser, not all of them, but almost every single mainstream browser today can trace their lineage back to the late 1990s and primarily came from just two sources. So the first one is Mozilla Gecko. So this powers things like Firefox, Tor. It was forked or separated, so separate code, by Pale Moon back in 2016. But anything in that family comes from there, and you can see that it was around 2009 that it peaked, just before our friend Google Chrome came along. So we have this constant to and fro. These one grows, one shrinks, one grows, one shrinks. Very similar to the pattern that I mentioned in the previous video about operating systems. Then the second one was KDE KHTML, a little bit of a mouthful, possibly why it didn't do what it needed to do. But this was huge, so big in fact that in 2003 Apple forked it. So again, they separated and said, great, we're going to take this and go and develop our own stuff. That became WebKit, which is still what powers Safari today. And then in 2013, Google forked WebKit and called it Blink. Later on, Opera also switched onto that. Edge, believe it or not, so Microsoft Edge is also powered by Blink. And so Blink is what powers the vast majority of browsers today, but it has this background back in KDE. And if you don't know who KDE are, just a phenomenal organization that create really, really good tools and always have for the last sort of 20 to 30 years in what I consider a very ethical market. Okay, so why am I going through this? Well, because it's important that we understand this background when we're picking and selecting which browser we're going to use. Now, there are a lot of others. I'll give you this link so you can go and look at them yourselves. I think the three emerging ones that I'm not going to talk about today are Huawei's ArcWeb, and this powers their Harmony OS, all of their browsers. So it's if Blink and Gecko with the big Western guys, I suspect that ArcWeb will turn into the big one for the Eastern market, but we'll see. There's also the Flow browser from Ekio. Now, as far as I'm aware, this is proprietary, so it's not open source. I may be wrong, so somebody can correct me. Still very, very early in development, but can live across multiple different devices as well, which is pretty cool. And the one that I'm personally most excited about is the Ladybird browser, which is being built on something called LibreWeb. So Ladybird, as you can see from this page, it's not out yet as a browser. You can't use it. I think they have a release scheduled for 2006, but it is a non-profit. They've had tons of donations, and they are trying to build sort of the next modern open source right from the base. So who knows how it'll go, but I think it's a really interesting project, has loads of very, very cool people in it. So go take a look at Ladybird. I won't be discussing that today, but it's an interesting one to keep an eye on over the next couple of years. So I've mentioned a few times there are so many browsers, and there's no way that we're going to go through all of them today, and I'm not going to go through all of the engines with you. But for those of you that want to dig deep and do your own research, I am going to share a link in the description to something by Nerdy Slacker. Wonderful name. This is on GitHub. And he, along with a couple of other contributors, he or she actually, I don't know who Nerdy Slacker is, so we'll just say Nerdy Slacker has put this list together, and you've got 240 browsers. But what I like is that they detail the engine, they detail the operating system. So if you want to do some independent research and say, here are all the possible browsers I can use and their backgrounds and the links, this is a very, very cool and very extensive list. Okay, so for our purposes today, I'm just going to focus on Chromium and Gecko-based browsers, because I suspect that they are going to be the most likely way that you stop using Chrome, Safari, one of the really, really, really big browsers. So let's start with Chromium. Chromium dominates the browser market. And very recently, Google have worked with the Linux Foundation to create an initiative to fund open development and to enhance projects within the Chromium ecosystem. Now, while I think this is a very, very cool step away from Google, it is signed and supported, I'll put a link in the description, by Google, by Meta of Facebook fame, by Microsoft, and by Opera, which should tell you a lot. So, yeah, I think it's a good step, but be cautious. And Chromium projects, right, the core underneath the browser, is still owned, run under the governance models of Google. So, yeah, it's a good step. But if, like me, you prefer avoiding massive corporations where you can, there's nothing wrong with them. They innovate really well. You might love them. But as this is a FLOSS channel, you might consider alternatives. But, you know, I'd be massively remiss if I didn't include some browsers in here. So getting onto it then, I think if you're just looking for your first browser switch that has a lot of familiarity, that is easy, and you want to get started, but you don't really want a lot of complexity, I'd probably recommend either Brave or Vivaldi. So Brave is a really solid choice. It's got a lot of built-in ad blocking, privacy protections, and unique features as well, like decentralized finance tools, which is kind of cool. It uses a mixture, I would say, of sort of closed source and open source, proprietary, FLOSS. But I think as a mainstream alternative to Chrome, it is one of the best things that you're going to get. And I would say almost exactly the same with Vivaldi. Vivaldi is probably more customizable, I would say. So if you're somebody that likes tailoring your web experience to be very precise, Vivaldi is a really, really good option for you. They're the sort of the main two. However, they are not true FLOSS. So 3 others that I'm going to suggest you go check out. The first one is Ungoogled Chromium. So for FLOSS purists, like it suggests, this is Chromium, or Chrome. Let's say Chromium. And what they've tried to do, wherever possible, is strip out all Google-related code. So that has some pros and cons. One, it means it's lightweight, it's quick. You're not going to be tracked by Google in the same way that you are by using Chrome. Inevitably, it comes with some downsides, so there are lots of features that you might not be able to use. I think it's a really, really incredible browser. If you are somebody who says, I want to use everything and I need every single feature and I care more about that than privacy, probably not the right option. But the project, I mean, you can see it all here, and it's often updated. It's well written. So Ungoogled Chromium is a very good project. And then the other one is our friends KDE, who I may have mentioned already, for those of you that remember that. Also have their own browser, and this is lightweight, fully open source. It runs brilliantly on a whole heap of Linux distributions, but as I said, again, it can be a bit limited in features unless you're willing to play around with it. So Ungoogled Chromium, Falcon, I think two phenomenal options if you want to use a Chromium-based browser. And I will give one more shout out, I think, to Thorium. It claims to be the fastest browser on Earth. I don't have an opinion on that, but it's sort of a fast and niche option that I think is gaining a bit of popularity. It is a little bit opaque somewhat in its development model. Mixed reviews, some of them really advocating for it, some of them not. But I think this is a cool project for people that really want to dig in and figure out what they're doing. So yeah, so that's Chromium. So I think for the rare times that I need a Chromium-based browser, because I do sometimes, sadly, occasionally there will be a very new feature that only Chromium has built in, so I have to use it. So I personally use Ungoogled Chromium or Brave, dependent on what I need. I think they both do what I need out of the box for simple web browsing and using a couple of sites. And frankly, both of them support some of the philosophies and ethics that I like, but you will find your own. So let's move on to Gecko-based browsers. And again, most of these developed initially by Mozilla as the foundation for Firefox and its derivatives. And I find that Gecko-based browsers are generally more FOSS or FLOSS compliant and broadly more privacy focused. As always, there are always exceptions to the rule, both ways. So don't believe me, go and do your own research, dig in, find what works for you. But here are some good Gecko-based options outside of just Firefox. And Firefox is a great browser. So if you use Firefox, you're happy with it, good job, you are fine. But I'm going to give you a few other options. So Floorp, it actually started out, I'm not sure it might still be a student project. This is my personal favorite. This is the one that I use as my daily driver as much as I possibly can. It's got a lot of options to customize. You can do sidebars, but I've also, it's also got all sorts of open source licenses, does all sorts of privacy stuff, takes away user tracking. So for me, it is the best Gecko-based browser that I've found that balances usability, privacy, and some real FLOSS principles. So this, I like this browser. Who knows if it'll be around forever? I don't know, but yeah, it works for my need. The others that you might want to look at, Pale Moon and Basilisk. So these are full-on forks of Firefox. It started with Firefox, and then they've made so many changes to it, they now develop by themselves. And I think they do some very, very interesting stuff. I'm not going to go through all of it. And there is a little bit of a proprietary nature with Pale Moon, but I think these are good Firefox alternatives if you are not deep into the privacy realm. So if you're not using Floorp or you want to try something different, go check out Pale Moon and Basilisk. And then we're on to, I guess, browsers that they happen to be a lot of the time open source or FLOSS in nature, but that comes from having a base more from user privacy. And these two things sort of overlap. So sometimes you really care about privacy. Other times you don't really care about privacy, but you really care about FLOSS. And then you get ones that sort of sit in the middle, and because they've started here, it actually makes a lot of sense that they've ended up here, and vice versa. So there are three browsers that you should check out if privacy is really important for you. The first one is LibreWolf. That's Basilisk, not LibreWolf. This is LibreWolf. And this is really focused, as they say, on privacy, security, freedom. It's very popular, big community, very well thought of. Again, as with all privacy-focused browsers, you won't be able to do everything you can on something that's giving large tech companies all of your information. But it is a really solid browser for those of you who need privacy over really integrated customization and features. The other one, which is very cool, which integrates really well with VPNs, is Mullvad. And this also, like LibreWolf, removes telemetry, enforces strict privacy rules, and has been developed in line with the Tor project. Or the Tor project contribute to it and help with it, but it doesn't rely on the Tor network. So LibreWolf and Mullvad are very good if you want privacy-focused browsers. And I would be remiss, as I've mentioned it already, if I didn't call out Tor. I think most of you will know about Tor already or have heard about it in mainstream press at the least. And this is really designed for anonymity. I don't think that it is ideal every day because of its slightly slower speeds, frankly. But that's not the point of it, right? It's not meant to be fast. It's not meant to be fully featured. This is all about removing as much tracking, surveilling, censorship, and everything else that you can, because of the way that it routes traffic through the network is very different to the way that a lot of other browsers will do it. So yeah, there's so many resources out there about Tor, I don't feel the need to talk about it anymore, but go take a look if that is important to you. Lastly, I guess I did mention thorium at the start, so I would be remiss if I didn't also mention mercury. Mercury is the Gecko-based counterpart to thorium. So that's another one to go check out if you like. So yeah, I think while there are many great options, I personally use Floorp all day, every day, as much as I can on my desktop and laptop. And when I can't use Floorp, I'm typically using, can't find it, Ungoogled Chromium or Brave. But honestly, any of the browsers that I mentioned today are good. And I'm sure that I've missed some out. There are going to be some people out there who I'm going to really annoy with some of my descriptions. And that's good, and that's absolutely fine. As all of you know, I'm a big proponent of having your own mind, thinking your own way, and putting information out there to help others. So if you have a different opinion, if you have a browser that you love, if you think that I've missed a major browser and want to tell me off or give me slap wrists, or maybe you're somebody developing a new browser and you just want to give it a little bit of airtime, absolutely add your comment below. If it's cool, I may even add it to the link descriptions. If not, I'm sorry. But yeah, enjoy, go out, find your next browser. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.